we done
Secretary.
or a chief executive or a secretary?
I nominate Liz to be secretary. Why, just because I'm a chief?
It'll be double the remuneration for the councillors. Doing something like that.
Yeah.
And my favourite.
We need to call this meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody, and Mr. Mohi, would you give us a formal welcome, please?
He te runga rawa, ka huri mātou kia koe tēnei pō. Mana ki te ao mātou hui ki te kōra rero ngā mea e pāna ki te rohe o ka hangana whānui. I tēnei wā, ko te tumana ko te ngāka, ko te rereke o ngā whakaaro hui tētehi ki tētehi, ka taitarangi mārea ki a mātou. Nō reira i koe nei mea ka pātai ke runga te ngui hukarati a kāke. Amen.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any apologies? I have one. I have to leave at 3:45 at the latest. Walk out the door.
In that vein, I have to leave sometime just after 2, so I'm going to be going to Melbourne to see my son.
Okay. Any other apologies? None. Tom, would you move to accept the apologies? Thank you. Neil, second. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Notices. Are there any notices? If there are no notices, we will move on. Any conflict of interest that are new and to our conflict of interest register? I advise that everyone should check those periodically because things do change. There are no new conflict of interests. We'll move to confirmation of the minutes of the 30th of August. It was a very long minutes because it had that addition to it. Are there any corrections to the minutes? If there are no corrections, do I have a mover to say that they are correct? Paul, seconder? Peter? All those in favour? Against? The minutes of the 30th of August are confirmed as correct. Thank you very much. Item 4, follow-ups.
Chair, I'll just take those as read. Have no comment to make in relation to any of those, but happy to take questions from councillors.
Any questions on the follow-ups? Neil. I usually do. So if we have to, can I just finish this follow-ups and then we'll come back to that. So I apologise for that. We don't normally, it's not on the run sheet, but.
Oh no, matters arising when you're running follow-ups. So it can be brought as matters arising.
Okay, we're calling it follow-ups, matters arising. So you're on.
Oh, look, I didn't have one. I was just pointing out
Yeah. Well, technically, perhaps we've got, because some of us understand those the terminologies, we call it follow-ups dash matters arising. Then you've got a follow-up section. No. Follow-ups is it? Fenton?
Oh, just through you, Chair, I had a request for information, the Chief Executive. I haven't, I see it's not noted here, but I also haven't had any feedback on that.
What was that? What was the...
I wanted information on the resignation of the previous Chief Executive.
Ah.
You did ask.
So, as you'll recall from my response, I was keen to take some advice on the Privacy Act matters and have not sought that yet. So that's something
So
I'll
you'll be in
follow up.
touch?
Yeah, I'll be in touch on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other matters arising follow-ups? There are none. We don't need to, we can move none other than Fenton's. We'll note Fenton's. Call for minor items not on the agenda. Paul.
Just a minor item, Chair, update on Tutera.
Peter, and then Debbie.
Consent, water consent applications for the Hiratonga Plains.
Debbie.
And Joyce, and sorry, I have
two.
two, Chair, sorry, and coastal hazards update.
Debbie.
Thank you. I had a bit of a question around the newsletter that was printed in the local newspapers.
Newsletter. We want to speak to it. Yes.
Whitehall visit.
A viral visit. A visit or visits?
No, we've had a meeting since the first one, I think. So.
No, we haven't. We have three visits.
Well, it was a corporate meeting, didn't we? Anyway, I'll cover all.
Watch newsletter, watch publication.
Oh, well, she'll just talk to it when it comes to it. Yeah, you can, if you want to chat over a cup of tea, but you can just talk to it. Yep, viral visits. Any other? Oh, I'll be here all day. Hope I get these up. Right. We have 5 items for general business, so that's good. Okay, we'll move straight to item 6. Navigation safety by... Oh, one important thing is the guys are moving up. My chairman's report, which I finished yesterday, most important part of the meeting, Leanne. Gee, I note it wasn't here. So that will come to you and be compulsory reading over at lunchtime. So, welcome, gentlemen. Is our harbour master taking us through this, or wait? We'll hand the floor over then to you.
Good morning. The paper before you, the 2017 Navigation Safety Bylaw, which we're seeking council's consultation on. The reason for the report is that the 2012 Navigation Safety Bylaws need to be updated in 2017, and an approval is sought to take the proposed version of the 2017 bylaw back to public submission prior to its return to council for approval and adoption. The consultation process and outcomes which we undertook were special consultative processes, and they were undertaken during late 2016 through early 2017. The initial consultation on the bylaw began in October 2016 with an invitation to the public to make comment and attend public meetings throughout the region. A first draft of the proposed changes to the bylaws was then completed and submitted to Maritime New Zealand for their comment. A further draft, taking into account feedback from the informal consultations with the public and Maritime New Zealand, was produced, and this is the document that sits before council today.
Martin, if I can just rudely interrupt you. the councillors will have all read this, so
Right.
you can just do an executive précis assuming that they've all read it. They will have read it. They're a very diligent lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, perhaps Martin, just highlight what the key changes are. I think
Yeah.
would be the
that would be the-
most valuable
Okay.
use of your time.
Prior to composing the document, which sits before you, we spent time reading through the bylaws for the regions, particularly the ones adjacent to Hawke's Bay, to try and bring about some consistency around the place. The most glaring absence from the Hawke's Bay bylaws was the mandatory registration of jet skis. The reason that we seek to bring that in as mandatory in the region is they do provide the most nuisance calls that we receive around the place. They lend themselves to abuse, particularly on the River Clive and around the beaches at Ahuriri and Harding Road. Anecdotal evidence in the regions that do have mandatory registration of jet skis would indicate that once there's a way of identifying the user, it becomes almost self-policing. Once people know that they can be identified and approached about their behaviour, then they start to behave themselves a lot better. It also, from their side of the coin, gives us something because they are one of the most stolen objects from people's driveways, and so we can help by tracking the jet skis down. And that would be the most significant change. The rest really are circumstantial changes which bring us into line with other regions around the North Island.
Very much. Wayne, do you want to add anything before councillors ask questions?
No, nothing to add, just except to say that, of course, that from here on, the next step in this process will be going out to final public consultation, where based on this document and any requests from around this table, so once it goes out to the final public consultation, then we've got to take it back to Maritime New Zealand, and that's just to tick the legislative boxes to make sure that's legal what we're doing. And we just ask if you've got something which you want to raise, which you're not going to raise today, to please get hold of either myself or Martin as soon as possible, so we can build that into the next step.
Thank you. Debbie, question. We'll just stick to questions now, and then.
Thank you. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning.
I'm not sure if you covered it before I decided to throw my cup of tea around, but the navigational safety licences, can you just clarify that? Are we now invoicing $100 per boat?
Not per boat, per operator.
And we haven't done
At
this
the
in past?
at the moment, we have no licensed operators that operate outside the Maritime New Zealand called MOS. The licence fee, the licence process that we undertake is for operators who don't fall within that MOS system, such as under MOS would be a commercial fishing charter, or something along those lines, whereas the licences we look to issue are the guys who run the kayaks on Pandora Pond, and that sort of low level activity.
Sorry if I just pop in there, Councillor. At the moment, as Martin says, we don't actually have any of those operators, but if we did have any, there are some duties which we have to perform as administrative duties as part of them having their licence, and what this bylaw seeks to do is to get us paid for that work rather than that work being done at the cost of the ratepayer. So it's suited for a user pays component of that licensing.
So it's not for every recreational boat?
No.
User. All right, thank you. And my only other one, and I've raised it with you before, is the Prongahau River, and in the area that you are shading out, that's just where the water skiing is. You're your boats come up, they turn around in this shaded out area. It's not deep enough further down, so I see a problem there, and I've flagged that before. I still see a problem there.
We did meet with a, excuse me, we did meet with a user group recently when those cars came bogged on the beach, and went over that with them, and the user group down there, who were the regular boating fraternity, do see that as being a workable option, the shaded area. Hence it's still there.
My question is about process, and I'm wondering why this paper hasn't come to, for example, a Corporate and Strategic Committee first. Why is it necessary to come directly to Council? And those were the first two questions. I've got some others after that.
Yes, in terms of the process, we're following a process that was set down when the last bylaws were done 5 years ago. So the reasoning behind that, I don't know. We're following the process, which we understand is what we're required to do by Maritime New Zealand. And I agree, it's very clunky.
With respect, that's a different question you've answered. My question is, why did this paper come to the Corporate and Strategic Committee of Council? Is there some sense of urgency must do that comes directly to the Council table? And this is, I guess, to you as the Chief Executive, James, I think we should have all these papers should come to Council Committee, so the questions that have been asked by Councillor Hewitt can be asked at the committee meeting, not at the Council meeting. This should be just for approving things, and if necessary, a second discussion. So I think this is a very poor process.
If you want to, so look.
Well, perhaps before Mr Palmer answers, I'll just give a little bit more of the background to it, because the initial discussion around these review of the navigation safety bylaws occurred last year through the committee meeting process, and at that point it was agreed that any changes that were incorporated into that prior to initial public consultation. And really this was just bringing back the outcomes of that process, with obviously the highlighting the main change that had occurred. So yes, possibly it could have or should have gone to a committee meeting, but there's certainly the initial discussions about the intent of the review were held at committee level, and this is really an opportunity for Council to just endorse and adopt these for further public consultation.
Councillor, there's no ambiguity in terms of the councillor expectation and policy that there be double debate and that papers go through committees prior to that. So look, we'll review off the back of this one whether this one was erroneously sent straight through, and it's something we'll continue to monitor. So your point's entirely valid. We'll look into it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm not sure if I'm doubling up on the question you got from Councillor Hewitt, but there's a section here that proposes to have registrations for personal watercraft, I think they're called, as opposed to jet skis. And there's another one that deals with registration of commercial vessels, but there's a whole, I think, for private boats, you know, launches and what have you. That must be deliberate. Does that make us different from what happens in other parts of New Zealand, or is it pretty normal for you know, private boats not to be registered or not required to be registered?
That's entirely consistent with what happens elsewhere. It's not something I'm personally comfortable with, but it is a national trend that boats remain, whilst they have to be named, remain unregistered.
So have you considered proposing a change for here, if there's a justification for doing so?
I hadn't considered that at this stage now.
Just 2.2.4 on page 22 talks about a vessel greater than 6 metres in length shall ensure that every person on board wears a properly secured personal flotation device, etc. Is that a national deal that's come in, or is we just going to sneak that through?
That is consistent with the Maritime Transport Act Rule 91, which concerns recreational craft. Our own bylaw is stronger than that in that we do insist that it's worn on craft under 6 metres, and other regional councils, other areas of the country are now coming into line with that, but it isn't a national requirement that people wear them at this stage.
But this says greater than 6 metres.
Greater than 6 metres. It is at the discretion of the skipper in bad weather, and that is in the Maritime Transport Act Rule 91.
But with all due respect, that's not what it says here. It says every master of a vessel greater than 6 metres shall ensure.
Whenever there is a risk.
Word shall changes it.
I'm sorry.
I'm just asking. I mean,
I'm sorry.
I've been saving to buy a 6 metre boat, so I don't have to wear a bloody life jacket. But you shoot me down in flames, there, mate. It's got where there is a risk.
Yeah.
Are you thinking there should be a change to that, Councillor?
No, I just wanted that explained to me.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, yeah.
My question was along the same particular clause, because as Councillor Wilson has pointed out, the term about wearing the requirement to wear the personal flotation device is whenever there is a risk to the safety. So that's a bit of a grey area to my mind. So the question I have is there intended to be an education program so that people, skippers, what do they call them? Master of every vessel, has a reasonably good idea in their head as to what there is, what a risk to safety actually is, from your point of view.
I mean, I guess the classic example of the clause, who would be caught up in that clause, was the skipper of the boat that tried to go out come back in over the Kaipara Bar shortly before Christmas last year. And that is the clause that Maritime New Zealand would have sought prosecution on had he survived.
Yeah, so it's pretty hard to legislate for stupidity and common sense. Yeah.
Well said. You've got a vote too,
No, my boat's in the bath, actually. Right. We're not quite up to it yet.
Sorry, any more questions? Okay, do we have a mover to accept us, to approve the draft, actually, to approve the draft? Do we have a mover to approve this draft? Peter, and a seconder. Do you wish to speak? Anyone else?
Just briefly, Chair, I think, something like the bylaws are really good for navigation safety bylaws, but the key one to me is public education, and just looking at what the council is doing and the harbour master is doing at the moment, I'm really pleased with the efforts that have been put in there. So I'd just like to congratulate Martin for that. I've seen him out and about, and I've seen stuff go on out in the community with educating about the use of life jackets and such.
Are there any other speakers? Peter, do you want to, we didn't speak in the first place, so you don't want to wind up. Okay, all those in favour of approving this draft? Aye. Against? It's approved. Thank you very much, Martin. And thanks for this report. As a non-boat or non-sea person, I found it particularly interesting, especially all the little channels, and the depth of your job is quite huge. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Wayne, too. You're always there, mate. Making sure it happens. Okay, we will move to item 7. This is the delegation item.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So Mr Miller, our consents manager, is going to run you through these, and these are changes that are proposed to be made to our delegations manual as a result of the changes to the Resource Management Act from this year. So I'll hand over to Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. There has been legislative change. It's coming in stages, and stage 2 takes effect in October. So we needed delegations to line up with those changes ahead of that. So mostly the delegation changes are picking up from that, but there are one or two other just minor amendments that we've made, recognising in one situation that we just didn't have the delegation provided, so we've included it. Basically, it's as simple as that. There's a summary in the report of the changes. They're then shown in the delegations manual, and there's also attached to this a MFE overview of the legislative changes, which includes all aspects of the change that came through with the RLAA 2017. So it's the main ones are on the second page of that, under the heading of consenting in force from 6 months after royal assent. So that's...
My question is, why is this paper coming directly to the council here? Why has this paper not followed what we have as a general understanding about our process, that it goes to a council committee first? I know that the Hearings Committee chair has got a very, very full slate and could have struggled to have found time for it on his agenda, but I'm sure he would be able to negotiate with another committee chair for it to go there. So why has it just come here? Can the Chief Executive or explain to me why this is, please? Liz?
Well, look, royal assent in terms of the bill coming into effect, as noted in the paper, is the 18th of October, so there is a timing imperative. Why the paper couldn't be prepared earlier and therefore go through committee in time for that, I would have to defer to Mr Miller to advise council of that.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, and I asked when we were required to approve the PanPAC case going to the Environment Court, the same thing. The question was put, why didn't that go through the Hearings Committee? Why are we paying $1,000 a month for a Hearings Committee chair if we're not using them? And if you're not using them, well, and you're into delegations, why didn't it go through Finance, Audit and Risk? This keeps happening.
Just in response to that.
Can I just check whether Mr Miller actually has got an answer to the question?
I take the point that you raised with the previous item as well. This is what we've done previously. We've brought it straight to council. It's a council delegation that's required. It doesn't sit down at the committee level, but it could have come through a committee step before it got here. But that's not what we've done in the past, so it was just following that same practice.
Well, that being the case, I just make it clear that my expectation, I thought the expectation of this council was that all papers would go to committee before it came to council. And with respect to the royal assent, the royal assent, if you noted here, was there on the 18th of April. So there's plenty of space between the 18th of April and now to have gone. And you would have had notification that was going to the royal assent on the 18th of April. There's a first reading, a second reading, a third reading, etc., etc. So there's plenty of warnings about these things. So you just make it, I think it's a good practice to go to committee before it comes to council.
Understood. And look, just in defence of staff, I'm aware that certainly when I arrived at council, there were certain papers that with some regularity were coming directly to council, such as a delegation question like that. But if the expectation, which I believe is universally supported by councillors, that all papers, no matter what their content, go through a committee, then we will adopt that.
Mr Chairman.
Peter was on. I'll come back to you. With the floor to Peter because he's such a well-paid chair of the...
so I confirm that I would have been
often.
happy to call a meeting of the Hearings Committee to handle this paper, but I'm not going to get my knickers in a twist about the fact that that process wasn't followed. So I'd rather spend my time dealing with the substance of this paper, and I want to refer you, Malcolm, to page 8 of the paper. where you're dealing with section 95, 95A, etc. And if we have a look at the description of function, it says determine whether to publicly an application, so there is a word missing, and I'm guessing that the word is notify. So that needs to be inserted, and I note in relation to the same item that the council has reserved for itself the right to determine that if the application is for water bottling consent, the council will make the decision to notify, and I would have thought that those words needed to be added in there to clarify what the extent of the delegation is. So I would expect that that needs to happen.
Thank you, Peter. Neil.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Again, going to the substance of the problem for staff this morning is you've got us out of bed too early, so we're a bit grumpy.
Yeah, does appear to be the case.
Particularly Councillor Barker. I want to walk through, Councillor Bevan's made a good point on that issue, but I just want to go back to the general principle of delegations and where they stand in terms of council. And I wanted to start off with, on page 4, in regard to hearings. Now, in fact, can I take you to page 6? Sorry, this it's at the bottom right-hand corner of the green coloured sheets, the actual delegation spreadsheet itself. Sorry, it's out. I can't even see what the number. Yeah, 75. Page 6 of the green numbering. Is it page 75? I can't read it. Yeah, I can't read it. 74, yeah, it is. So if we go to, that's the application for resource consent. We've retained to the council, decide on a request that an application be directed to the Environment Court, and that goes to both Councillor Hewitt's question and to Councillor Bevan. So we've retained that capacity. We're needing to add in water bottling there somewhere along the line. But then going back, if I can trouble you to do that, to page 72 or 4, we've got there under hearings the power to strike out a submission. I would, presently the delegations read that the power to strike out a submission would be deferred as down the chain down to a principal consenting planner. I think in effect we should retain that as a part of a council decision, or at very least the chief executive. I want to follow through to page 76, page 8, where Councillor Bevan took us to a little moment ago. And I'm suggesting the public notification generally, that sits with half the Western world, or at least most of the staff. I see that as also a politically orientated delegation, and I wonder whether we ought to contain it as such. And particularly the third item, third down in that row, decide if an activity may affect customary rights. Now, I would suggest that we would do well to delegate that, or at least have conversations with the RPC around that. Can someone tell me whether it's possible, in fact, for customary rights to delegate to a statutory committee, the RPC?
For council to delegate that function to someone else, are you saying? Or
my point is, Mr. Chair, we've got a situation where issues of, if you like, a political element, and in this case a customary element, are deferred to the staff. And I wonder, in fact, we would be wiser.
Could I perhaps clarify that the staff aren't making a judgment on whether it's a customary marine title? It's once that's established through the process that is being run through the MACA Act, groups have applied. Once those are established, or even in the application stage, and then definitely once they're established, there are certain processes that we're directed to follow. including and so the judgment we've got to make is, having identified the interest, whether we consider they're affected in the case of a specific application.
Well, that doesn't say that in the description. It's saying decide if an activity may have effects on a protected customary right. And you're saying that we'll reserve we will apply the delegation down to senior consent planner. I'm suggesting that it sits somewhere else other than ultimately with a senior consent planner or including a consent planner.
So in practice, what we'd be talking about here is as Mr. Miller said, the interest has been established, and a consent comes in, and this is very similar to a whole range of tests that a consent planner would need to make in receiving a consent. Does it trigger an interest, if you like, that then gets incorporated into the decision making? So
aren't they one and the same thing, that we've delegated that responsibility to a consent planner when it carries with it significant interest of a significant part of the organisation?
In practice, it's unlikely to be a particularly subjective call. So, for example, there'd be a Wahitapu site on a map. Really what we're talking about is them taking the application and saying, does this application for a discharge or whatever it is run over that site on a map? It's a highly administrative decision that they're taking. It's not a particularly subjective one about, how material is the interest, is there really an interest there, that sort of thing. In practice, that's how I would anticipate that to work. So you are suggesting taking a relatively administrative step to a much higher level.
Could I just add to that? The other suggestion is it goes to the RBC, but the RBC by statute is about plans and planning processes.
Exactly.
The suggestion here is taking it into the RMA, which is not in its scope at the moment. So this is expanding. The suggestion would expand the scope of the RPC dramatically.
Yeah.
The other point I'd make to you is that a customary right is a common law right. And what the conversation on customary rights has been primarily about Māori interests, and I get that. But when you talk about a customary right is a common law right, which is generally applicable.
And in that respect, it's very similar to is there an affected person test. So when an application comes in, are you affecting your neighbour, for example? You've had a presentation on the MACA at the last RPC, and as you saw, there were essentially a section of marine coastal area that's designated, and really it's a pretty binary test as, is this application in that area or not? I understand the concerns that the councillor has, given the contentious nature of this, but actually this is a very administrative process step that we're talking about here.
I've heard those words before. Mr. Chair, going then to the public notification of an application, is that a simple administrative task, or is that something that carries with it significant political implications? Ditto determining whether a hearing is necessary and determining non-notified consents. Are they in the same category as minor administrative detail, or do they carry with them such as the going to the Environment Court or water bottling?
Mr. Chairman, could I perhaps answer that? I think decisions around public notification, unless there's already a policy established, as there is in the case that you've made for water bottling, should not be a political decision, because actually the risk comes back to council about a judicial review. The resource consenting process under the Resource Management Act is a judicial process, and there's very clear expectations that it's managed in actually a very administrative way, as opposed to political intervention.
So I'd like to make a comment on that as well. The decision to publicly notify actually does have significant repercussions for the applicant, because it's going to greatly extend the length of time that the processing of the application will hear, and it's going to greatly increase the cost. And I do agree with Councillor Curtin to the extent that the proposal is that almost anybody in the consenting team can make that decision, and I would have thought it would have needed to be somebody pretty senior, given the implications, that would make that decision. And I question whether, you know, there's a designation for almost everybody in the line there, and I think that's probably a step too far. It is in my view anyway.
So could I ask Mr. Miller, in practice, does any recommendation on public notification come through to you?
Yes, it does, but not all of them. And a lot of consents can be really minor in nature. So, and the
Ones that are publicly notified?
no,
'Cause that's what we're
all
talking about.
consents. I'm saying. So whatever the consent, we've got to make a decision on whether it's notified or not. And in fact, 95% are probably non-notified. But that decision needs to be made. Some of them are very minor in effect, and I would suggest bore permits are in that category. So we actually have bore permits processed at quite a low staff level.
So
so they carry the delegation to be able to actually make the decision on the notification.
It's not what
as
we're
well.
talking about here. What we're talking about here is the determination on whether to publicly notify.
Yeah,
That's the same thing.
But what you're really saying, Malcolm, is you are not reviewing every single resource consent that comes in the door at your level to determine whether or not it needs public notification. There is actually some delegation on that question. And presumably if something triggers to a question of whether it might be contentious, whether it is or not, then it's getting elevated to you.
Yeah, I am seeing a good percentage. We have a form which I'm signing, which is there's the decision to notify or non-notify. Anything that's contentious, I'm seeing. There's a little bit of judgment in that, but it's the rats and mice that I won't necessarily see.
So for practical purposes, what you've done is adopt what I'm suggesting we should put here, because the way this reads at the moment, anybody can make that decision. You're telling me actually what happens in the office is you get to see them when they're contentious. And I'm saying that's exactly what should happen, and we should require it to happen.
Yeah.
Because the way it reads, Malcolm, is that a consents officer could determine in a contentious case whether or not it's with public notification. Yeah. And that's not our practice, it's just the way this is reading.
So you're happy to make those changes?
Just one other, if you could indulge me, Mr. Chair, and that's on page 10, determining whether a hearing is necessary. Is that something that ought to go to the chair of the hearings committee to actually determine? I hear the arguments that say, you know, this is a non-political process, but the reality is it is. We've got a hearings panel comprised of politicians, and we've got elected people around this table. That's right, yes. We need to double his pay.
Look, I think what could help councillors with the interpretation of this document is maybe a process map that shows the decision pathways that are taken and the various different discretion points that exist and the escalation paths, if you like, under various circumstances. Because at the moment, that is implicit in here, but it reads that each test is being undertaken standalone and being delegated right down the line. Is that something, Malcolm, we can bring back?
Can do.
I think that's what's missing here, is that not every case is the same. And because you've got a hierarchy of people here, I read this, that the cases would be assessed, triaged, and the more important ones would go up the line, and the more simple ones would stay down the bottom. But that's not how it's written here. It's written as if all are equal and all stand alone. And so I think that interpretation of it would be helpful. And this is another reason why it would have been helpful to have this paper go to the hearings committee or another committee having this discussion so we get this thing sorted rather than the council meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I kind of reinforcing what Councillor Barker said and Councillor Curtin's point around the bit on page 8 about public notification. To me, is that special circumstances exist is the one that needs to come further up the line, because if I look at the examples I've come across in the time I've had an interest in regional council, there was the one about the oil and gas, and also around oil and gas exploration, and also the one around water bottling plants, which at the end of the day the special circumstance rule could have applied, and rather than would have given the public a lot more confidence around the decision that was made. The other one, I agree with Councillor Curtin is the one on page 4, the power to strike out a submission. I think that, especially the issue about deciding whether a person is not an expert, because to me, they're in some respects, they're subjective kind of calls, especially around frivolous or vexatious, but offensive type. What is deemed offensive to me is a little bit subjective, and so therefore it shouldn't be right down the line.
Could I speak to that? Just on that point. This is setting out a delegation that can be exercised, but I'm certainly anticipating that a chairman of a committee would have that delegation. They would get that as they become the chair of a committee and could exercise it through the process of a hearing. But this was to put in place the ability to actually strike it out in advance of a hearing. If there was one submission which was going to put the whole application into a hearing, and it was vexatious, it didn't deserve to actually be the reason that there was a hearing, we wouldn't have necessarily got to the stage of having a chair or a hearings committee appointed. So the delegation would have to be sitting somewhere with staff, and they could say this submission is not valid. It shouldn't be the reason for the hearing to proceed. We're going to strike it out. There is provision in the Act for the party that is struck out to actually object to that, and then it comes back to a council panel. So they've got a right of objection. Yes. So they can get reprieve if they want to argue it, but at least it gives us the ability to stop a process which looks like it's actually is being proceeded with because of a vexatious submission.
Yeah. The other question is for you, through you, Chair, for James. We've talked a number of times about looking at reviewing all the different delegations that the staff have got from council. This consenting process or RMA delegation has just been one part of that. Is that a program that's underway, and we're due to have a revisit all the delegations that we've granted staff, so that we've got an idea of what we're actually allowing you guys to do?
I'm not aware of a whole of organisation process. We're doing it in chunks. Obviously, you've got RMA ones in front of you today. Financial delegations, I think, have been considered in relatively recent time, but I'd need to make some inquiries and come back to you on that.
But it's probably a good idea that we do that in a workshop, or just understand. I 100% agree. If there's no more questions, do we have a mover subject to the changes which Councillor Curtin has?
I'll move.
Mover. Are you happy to second subject to those changes? Thank you. Would you like to speak, Alan?
Well, I'd just like to say we've got to be careful we don't overload staff with this issue of reviewing all delegations. I mean, we know that Chief Executive and the senior line managers are extremely busy. We've got a hell of a lot of important work in front of us. Let's not put too much on them.
The only comment I've got to make, Mr Chair, is that taking it from a customer's point of view, the applications, important applications, need to be considered at the right level, and there is a great deal of frustration for some customers when a decision is made at a relatively junior level and they have to go through the hoops to get it elevated.
I'll support this as long as everyone realises the implicit nature of the fact that the politicians don't get their fingers in the machinery on the way through. I'd remind people to have a look at what happened at ECAN, because that's where that process started. Politicians were too far into the consenting process.
Very good, Council. Any other thoughts? Do you wish to write a reply? We have a mover and a seconder. We're approving the amendments, and I just want to put in there, subject to the small additions that you'll put in that Councillor Curtin raised. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you very much. It's a tireless job. So item 8 are our recommendations to the Regional Planning Committee, and I guess this is what Councillor Barker was getting to, moves things along very quickly. So I'm the co-chair of the Regional Planning, so I'll just talk to those recommendations. the consultation process with oil and gas plan, which we're putting in, was the only decision item really. The reports that we received were as listed, 71, 72, 73. I just want to say I thought we had a very good presentation from, I've forgotten her name now, but Toro's daughter. I thought it was outstanding and really interesting from my perspective. I haven't been through one of those, and I'm sure everyone else enjoyed it. The trials and tribulations that they had to go through were quite amazing. And we had a verbal presentation on the science and Heretaunga Plains water, which was equally riveting. And I'm sure that needs to be shared. That particular report needs to be shared widely because it was pretty compelling. So those are the recommendations. Do we have a mover to accept those recommendations? Or do you want to comment on those recommendations? Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like you to take these recommendations separately. My question to you, James, with the oil and gas plan change, how widely has it been communicated that that's happening to the community at large? Because I'm still talking to influential people in my neck of the woods who aren't aware it's even on the radar.
So, Councillor, the purpose of the iwi stakeholder engagement plan is to reach out to the community reasonably expansively. The list of key stakeholders, obviously on page 4 of the plan, pretty far and wide, and we are attempting through this large list of organisations to reach those within the community that we consider to be most deeply affected. Included in that list, halfway down, you'll see general public, refers to public notices, media releases, website updates and social media. So this plan is all about reaching out to the community. Once it is adopted today by the council, then we'll be in full flight in terms of giving effect to it. So you can anticipate a high degree of public engagement on these matters in the coming months. So we'll be working with Opus in terms of the content of that, but the engagement itself will be very much driven by council communications team.
One comment on that, Councillor Hewitt. This issue has been widely canvassed in our local press. Thought really widely. The people you talk to read the New Zealand Herald, do they? Or not the local paper?
Just to echo the comment regarding the 7.3 presentation, the science on the Heretaunga Plains, and I would add to that presentation the press release that came out describing how we were going to be managing consents and so forth in this area, which is part of, I guess, the next committee report, and the Q&A document that was also put together. I haven't been on the website lately, but it seems to me that that cluster of documents should be much more visible someplace and packaged together. They collectively set the stage for why we've taken an extremely important action. And the Q&A, I don't think has gotten really, we were sent copies of it, I think, at one point. Or I can't remember whether I got it as a tank member or as a councillor or what. But that whole cluster of issues, I don't think has been, that background material isn't adequately visible, I think.
So the Q&A hasn't been put up ahead of council endorsing the approach. So today is the day in which the council formally endorses the recommendations from staff. So we've been careful not to preempt that. So the media statement was very carefully crafted to indicate a direction of travel, but not take a definitive position around the ins and outs of all of that. So that is ready to go, if you like. like. So subject to endorsement today, the Q&A will go up. I think it's a good suggestion in terms of the science presentation. What we have done in the last week, and I think it's ready to go, it was being reviewed yesterday, is we've done a short video presentation with Jeff Smith. Dr. Jeff Smith has been, who explains the science and all that. That's ready to go on our Facebook page, YouTube, etc. When we push the button. So and that can probably go up this afternoon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to, there's a question I've got with regard to the costs of the plan, and I don't think we've been quite answered, and I'm wanting to know whether it'd be useful to add at the end of recommendation 2 that requests a report detailing the costs of implementing the engagement plan be added to that recommendation.
Councillor, I think we have provided advice previously on the cost of the implementation of this plan, so the engagement phase. The far more significant costs and the greater level of uncertainty in relation to those costs relates to the options, the policy options that the council may wish to adopt, and the extent to which it wants to defend, if you like, its proposals. So I'm happy to bring back advice on that in due course, and that was the intention, as we bring back the options and the calibration the council need to take. But I think we can probably go back and just point the councillor to the place in which the engagement plan resources were outlined.
Thank you for that, but the issue I raised in committee and hoping to receive in the final version relate, for example, to Table 2 and Table 3 of the plan, where that cost of consultation, the extensive list there could run into several tens of thousands of dollars, and we haven't essentially received the costs of that.
I'll follow that up. It's fine.
Is that added into this recommendation?
Well, if it's the mood of the council to add that little bit, so we get that piece of information back.
Oh, I'm happy that it's added in. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hewitt has asked that we move this in separate items. So I'm looking for a mover on item 1 and 2.
Move, Mr. Chair.
Mover and a seconder. Do you wish to talk on the oil and gas one?
Oh, just briefly, Mr. Chair, to say that this is a process that there is strong support and desire to see consulted within the community, and this is the opportunity to do that. The public will speak throughout this consultation process, and we'll get a real gauge as to the appetite in the community to implement our proposal. One of the criticisms I'm thinking will come through is the cost of this exercise, and that's why I'm suggesting we're upfront and transparent about what we're doing, how much it's going to cost, and the likely benefits from the community as a result of the exercise.
Thank you, Tom. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. I can't support this again on the basis that the word prohibition, we're going to spend, the consultation bit will be the cheap bit, scrapping it out in the court, because we've got to defend a position that we've preempted. As I've said before, if we changed the word prohibition to the appropriate methodology to manage oil and gas and productive aquifers, we may end up there, but the way we've done it, we have to defend a position which is going to be expensive, and chances of success are 50-50 in my humble opinion. Let's see how it plays out. Whereas if we had the appropriate methodology, the oil companies then have to come and defend their position that it is safe. And I think that's a far better methodology to take forward. However, that horse is bolted, galloping down the track, and as it stands today, I can't support this.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm really pleased to see that all the stakeholder groups will be consulted using a very similar, if not the same method. That's very pleasing to me that we're all being treated equally. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? before we go back to your right of reply, I just want to have a little comment on this. I hear what you say, Councillor Wilson. There are risks in this. There are risks in pursuing what you believe to be right. And that's why I'm going to strongly support this. On a second matter, with oil becoming incredibly unpopular, huge oversupplies in the world, I've talked to experts in the industry, in the energy industry, who believe that in 10 years to 15 years there won't be any cars running on oil. That a fight. We already have huge stockpiles. The oil company are going to be less inclined to have a battle than we are. That's my thoughts. Neil, do you want to wind up? Okay, so we are accepting the recommendation, item 1 and 2. All those in favour? Against? 3 against. Do you wish to have? You do? Okay, all those in favour? Record them. And against? Thank you very much. It is carried. We now go to just receiving the reports 7.1, 2 and 3. Move up. Second up. Yeah. The 3, yeah. Okay. We have a move and a seconder. Any comments on those? All those in favour? Against? It's good. Carol, we received those reports. Thank you very much. We move to 9, Environment Services. Tom, just want to move your...
Taking this as read, the major item of the day, I guess, was the discussion of water management on the Haratunga Plains, and so various folks may wish to have further comment on that, but I'm perfectly happy with the outcome, and I don't recall there were some concerns about the urgency with which this work needed to progress and so forth, but I don't recall other concerns about the actual substance of the approach. The other issue somewhere in here, we did resolve on the direct referral of the PanPac application, which we did as a 2-step approve and then unanimously accept as a council action. That's listed at 5.1. And other than that, some excellent reports, and I just leave it to the floor to discuss.
Well, yes, Mr. Chair, if you could indulge me, I do have some questions on this, and I've got some very urgent advice to councillors that we reconsider our approach to the existing resource consents. I can certainly see the application of the activities around new consents, but I'm wanting to know some answers and questions in regard to 2.2, for example. Existing resource consents can be exercised within the conditions set, subject to review, and I just wonder whether Liz could address the issue of the review process, when it can take place, how broadly it can take place, and if she could follow on to 2.3, consent holder can use more water than previously provided to take with the maximum rates and volume. So if we could address what do we know about the current consenting arrangements, etc. In 2.4, for example, consenting expires. How many of those? What's the status of our existing resource consents, and how can we manage those?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll just ask Mr. Miller to answer those specific questions if he's able to, if you have the information on hand.
First question, 12.2, I think, was consent holder can use more water than previously provided. Oh, no, sorry, it was your first one, I think, 12.1. The review. That's sort of, so this is sort of saying, running forward, existing consents can continue to exercise as set out. What we're anticipating in terms of review is really that with tank, at a plan change, and once it becomes operative, that might give us guidance as to do something different. Review consents. If there's an allocation exceedance that tank addresses, then the allocation limits may be adjusted, and that we'd expect that instruction to come through tank to say here's how it's to allocate. Here's the steps you should now follow. So that statement there was to anticipate today they can carry on as conditioned, but that may through subsequent review change.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm getting a whole total sense that under the existing consent process, there is actually zero change, or so little that we have no impact at all, and we have no information about that. For example, we've got 200 consents that have depleting activities on rivers. There is no analysis of where they are, what quantities are involved. To me, we are well short of making a decision on adopting an interim management approach to current consents when we're missing so many pieces of vital information. My view is that the reporting here is well short of what we need to make a decision, and we need that information before doing so.
Well, I'd agree. We're not trying to jump the gun in terms of reviewing. We're trying to say that if a consent holder is reading this today, that they can read this to say, I've got a consent and I can carry on exercising. But if that consent's got a life of 20 years, it may be that they can't actually carry on exercising for 20 years because the plan will have picked up on the information gaps, determined what the allocation approach should be, and something changes. So all we're trying to flag is that there could be subsequent review. The RMA sets up a process where if a plan is made operative and sets out guidance and rules to say here's a different strategy, then you can review a consent to line it up with that strategy.
In fact, also what the approach is, the message that the approach is sending is actually there's very little we can do, if anything, in regard to existing consents in the short term. And what we're trying to do is actually just provide some certainty to the plethora of people who have phoned up since the science findings were announced, to find out actually what impact does that have here and now on my resource consent. A consent is a legal document. There are a number of rights that a consent holder has.
So perhaps
can I perhaps just add one other additional consideration? Theoretically, we could call in all the consents that are connected to the Heritonga aquifer system and review them. To do that would be an extraordinarily large undertaking. The time it would take us to do that and to make those changes and deal with any legal appeals, etc., would take us right through into the tank plan change notification process, etc. We're well advanced in terms of tank. We will not have an operative plan change, obviously, by the summer, and that's just the nature of the time it takes to undertake a planning process. So while technically that option is available to us, our advice to you is that the resourcing implications, etc., don't warrant it, and we do not believe that the environmental effects of continued abstraction within the existing consents this coming summer warrant that course of deviation of all of the council's resources away from supporting the tank process into reviewing all of those consents ahead of
I'm not asking for that.
But look, we obviously understand that there are pressures on the resource, and we are intending to work, we are working with the irrigation community, with the municipal suppliers and industrial users this coming summer to undertake voluntary measures to ensure that the community is conserving collectively its water use to the greatest extent possible. But we're not proposing to go down a legal route.
Mr. Chair, whether...
We're a long way from it. If I'm sorry to interrupt, but what we had in the paper, in the Environment Committee paper, was a comment: if abstraction were to increase to the allocated level, which is the advocated position in our existing resource consent, that is what we're looking to sign off here. If we did that, adverse effects would be even more significant. So, folks, you've got a problem. This does not deal with it. If we get a dry period, this council will be seen to be sitting on its hands doing nothing. Here's the opportunity to do something. I want to know, before we approve this approach, is there the opportunity to review current consents as it's specified in 2.2, what that review conditions look like. I want to know what it looks like from the 2.3, a consent holder can use more water up to their maximum. I want to know what that looks like. I understand that the stream depleting effects are for 200 consents. What does that look like? What we've got here is a council, and I'll tell you what, this takes me back to 2008, folks, and we will get absolutely caned for doing zero when we've got this opportunity to do something. So hear me, this is a repeat of 2008 when we got bad advice coming back from a hearings committee and we adopted it without, and the same debate going on right now. This is a recipe for disaster unless we do something.
Councillor, in 2012 and 2013 we had an extremely dry summer. During that time the total take by water users was estimated to be at 90 million cubic metres. We typically on a normal year are in the order of about 70. Yes, it is true that the total allocated volume is 180 million cubic metres. On the basis of that, therefore, our expectation is that even if we have a very dry summer, we are only talking about 90 million, or half of the allocated volume, being able to be used. The natural constraint is land, and obviously the biggest users, which are irrigators, don't ever wish to put more water on their crops and on their land than is desirable. So we don't believe there's any material risk of allocation getting anywhere remotely close to that 180 level. So we feel very comfortable that the effects that we would observe during a very dry summer under the current allocations would be comparable to, and not particularly worse than what was experienced in 2012 and 2013. So on that basis, I don't accept the view that the council's doing nothing. The council is deploying more of its resources on the tank plan change process and the science to underpin that than anything else. It is always frustrating that the plan change process moves at a pace which doesn't necessarily enable you to manage every issue as quickly as you would like, but we are making good progress. We are on track for notifying a plan change next year, and the process we're going through to build broad community support around a change in the allocation framework is something which is delicate. It's carefully negotiated, and we're making good progress on that. So we don't see any justification at this point for any sort of knee-jerk response in terms of that existing allocation. Our emphasis will be on building community understanding of the issues and encouraging water conservation to the extent that people are able to do so.
Just before you do, Peter, Neil, I know it's deeply frustrating. I can hear the frustration in your voice, but I think we do need to take a very pragmatic view of this, given the history. And James pointed out, the Twyford growers who were in desperate straits, they use 47% of their water through the global approach in the most severe drought we'd had for years. So put that to one side. If we made a declaration, which is still not been well communicated and will be challenged. You can be sure our science is. I talked to people yesterday who didn't agree with it. If we made a move on people's existing consents, we would be overwhelmed with litigation, and this would go tie up in knots for years. So I think the pragmatic approach we're taking, gently get this thing settled down before we, and everyone understanding the issues and the challenges before we make too many draconian decisions, and that would be pretty draconian.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. We all know we have an issue here that we're going to have to address, but a knee-jerk response that sucks the resources away from tank is not the way to deal with this. And we have a precedent for what happens in a dry summer, and we know that our aquifer can cope with it because it's coped with it at least once before in our living memory. So a sensible approach through tank to manage this in the longer term is the sensible course of action for me. However, having said that, I note in 2.4 that should a resource consent expire, the suggestion here is that the allocation under a reapplication would be for the same amount, and I don't know why would we be doing that when we actually have the opportunity to limit consents as they come up for renewal to what's actually being used, which in the longer term is what we have to do with all consents. So I think 2.4 should be changed from what it says in this paper.
Perhaps,
may's the critical word in there, so it may be replaced, and we do say it is likely that greater scrutiny, and I think we can...
And the other likely option, Councillor, and perhaps we could clarify this, is that if a consent was granted for that amount, it would be short-term and it would be called in for review once the outcomes of the tank plan change are
all right, well,
in place.
I think that's an appropriate wording, but I was actually thinking that what we could do is add replace for up to the same amount that is currently used. But look, as long as it's done on a temporary basis and we reserve the right to review, then we have the ability to reduce it back to current usage, which is what we are going to have to do. That was the first question I had, Chair. I had another question which relates actually to 2.7, permitted activity retakes, and under the resource management plan, correct me if I'm wrong, but anybody can take up to 5 litres a second without needing a resource consent. Is that correct?
5 litres a second and 20 cubic metres per day. So
yep.
the 5 litres only lets you run for about half an hour to get 20 cubic metres.
Oh, it's both. Okay, because I did some calculations and figured it could be 3,000 cubic metres a week, and I'm thinking everybody's going to start doing it. So there is a limitation on a daily basis. So the total, so under that permitted activity, you could only use up to 140 cubic metres weekly. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make it clear in my mind, because one of the comments I've heard with the presentations around this issue is that the situation, the science report that we came in doesn't show that the situation is critical right now, but it could be critical in the very near future, like talking if growth goes on as it is at the moment. So it's not a critical situation right now. Is that correct?
Well, look, the tank group itself has concluded that the current level of surface water effects from groundwater takes are at the maximum level acceptable. We do have a requirement as a council to maintain or improve water quality, so further degradation is not an option, which is why we're saying no further allocation in the absence of water storage or augmentation or other mitigation at this point in time. Right. So we are at a point where the effects are at the maximum they could be, but obviously there's still plenty of water in terms of the overall availability of the resource.
The key one to me though is it's not critical to the point where we need to be taking some sort of drastic action now, but we've got the time to be able to wait for tank to finish its work and put the new plan change in place, or put the new plan change in place to deal with this over-allocation issue.
That's broadly correct, although the decision that you are taking here to not allocate further water is a very significant step. So I don't want to downplay that. And so when we talk about drastic action, it's a very significant move on a resource which has been freely allocated, essentially, for the last 100+ years to move to a point of no further allocation. So we are taking a really big step in doing that. But what we're saying is that in terms of the existing allocation, the natural limitations on that in terms of land use are such that we don't need to panic that a vast amount of additional further water use is likely to take place.
I'll come back to you to a question. I just want to comment, Paul, just on one thing you said. So water use is very determined on land use. So you might have a 20-acre paddock that is currently growing a crop that has huge water use, like a ground crop. It may transfer to grapes or orchards, which are lighter, much lighter. And actually, so growth in certain areas of our economy will actually reduce the water that we use. So it's really complicated.
Yeah, I just want to go back to some of James's comments, because I don't think that there is much point in scaremongering this issue. Let me remind you that the tank composition includes every representatives of every major user group on the Haratunga Plains, whatever type of activity they're undertaking. They're all pretty shrewd individuals in terms of looking into the future and anticipating what their needs might be and how scary a proposition is this, and so on and so forth. They've had the advantage over some of us of having a lot more material presented to them that laid the groundwork for the action that they were asked to endorse. And I guess the culminating presentation of that was the Jeff's broad presentation that summarized all of that into what the overall state of the aquifer was, what total allocations were, the whole 9 yards of that, which I guess we presented, we saw in the context of the Regional Planning Committee meeting is where that was presented. So when you look around that cast of characters at the table, if those folks were looking at what we have proposed to do here as terribly frightening, unworkable from their business perspective, short-sighted, whatever, every alarm bell you could expect would have been sounded off in that set of discussions, which occurred over actually, I think, 2 or 3 meetings of the tank group. So the folks most in the know, who most represent, I think, the risk that you're concerned about, Councillor Curtin, are really deeply into this, on top of it, know exactly what limitations they may be facing while the tank thing comes to a closure, and are accepting of the approach, and as are the iwi and environmental folks sitting around the table as well, who one might be expected to be raising the alarm bells that you're raising. So I do think that this does represent a practical accommodation, if you want to look at it that way, an interim measure that gets us over one more growing season, where it appears to be no evidence whatsoever that there is going to be a flight to somehow extracting water that is unusable, practically speaking, on the land that is there to be farmed at this point in time. So I just don't think it's quite as there's a case to being quite as upset as you are. I would share the concern, if from where I come from in this whole debate, if I thought that the situation was different, but I don't see. I have seen the numbers. You say you're not seeing the information. There is plenty of information available out there that backs up what has happened, what these numbers are, what the allocations are, who's using what where. All of that is out there on the table and has been taken into account in arriving at this position. So I strongly support it.
Just in relation to the tank process and the conservation order, which is on the table at the moment, when do we make a call about resource allocation, and how do we prioritise, or in fact will tank actually go into abeyance while we deal with the conservation order, and will that then the next couple of years put this even further in doubt, and well, how else could you describe it?
It's currently a matter of discussion for the tank project team around resourcing. We haven't made a decision to down tools on the tank plan change at this point in time, and we're trying to box on. And one of the ways we're doing that is we're bringing in external consultancy help to assist us with the WCO process, which is less than ideal because it's all cost on the council. But at this point in time, both are running in parallel. There will likely be some slowing down of the tank group's work, because I suspect that actually, aside from the council's own resources, many of our stakeholders around the table will have other commitments with respect to the WCO hearings at precisely the same time we'll be trying to get them around the table. So that's a conversation that the tank group itself will be having shortly. We've just been trying to work through with the tribunal its program, and that's been a little bit of an unfolding question, and there seems to have been reasonably poor communication to date by the EPA in relation to the tribunal's likely timetable and things, and that's becoming clear right now. So we'll come back and provide you with some advice on that shortly.
Mr. Chair, we're coming back to me on that one? Yep. Well, look, I know we're not in debate and we've waved through it, but look, I'm touched by Councillor Belford's love affair with the tank people. They are wonderful people. And we would do well to listen to them. But the point I'm trying to make and get across here is that if the evidence that Councillor Belford says is there and that's been carefully considered, then let's see it in 2.2 to 2.5. Let's bring that evidence for this count. We're making the decision at this table. We're not making it at the tank table. And this takes me back exactly to the address, and Councillor Christine Scott would be very proud of Councillor Belford in his advocacy of this area, picking up. Well, the reality is we had the same advice coming from the Hearings Committee chair back in 2008 about allocating the bloody stuff. And we've ended up there. So what I'm saying is I don't believe this council around this table has had sufficient information, because no, we haven't sat around the tank table for 5 years. But we need to see, the staff needed to have brought to this table information and evidence to back up the 2.2 to 2.5, the existing resource consent regime adopted, for this council to decide to do exactly those things. And what I'm suggesting is that we wait a month for those, bring the information back, and then decide what we're going. I want to know what our review grounds are. I want to know the consent holder's use of that water in practical terms. 2.3 consents expired. I want to know how many expired and what the regime looks like. The overarching piece of evidence that Tank has produced is a report that shows we have stream depletion from across all consents. That's the new piece of evidence that needs to be factored in, and I want to know whether, in fact, we can use the evidence and insert it into our current existing resource consent regime by way of review and make some interim decisions around that. That's all I'm asking, is the information for this council to make reasoned decisions on.
Sorry, can I
Mr Chairman, can we make
respond to
some
that?
progress on this matter rather than a monologue?
Look,
We are making progress. The Chief Executive's about to, but I don't know whether I want to go straight to Debbie, but you
So look, the very purpose of the science presentation from Dr Smith at the RPC was to ensure that councillors as well as our tangata whenua partners do understand the science picture and the advice that's been presented to the tank group. So from a staff point of view, we've provided that to date. The paper that supported this at the ENS did have some numbers around use and consents. And as per my previous advice to the council earlier in this discussion, yes, technically the council can call in the consents across the Heratonga Plains and review them and put in place new conditions based on science. However, that will be an extraordinarily resource-hungry exercise. It may involve litigation, and our advice to you is that it's not a prudent use of the council's resources. Now, if the council is of a collective view that it would like further advice on the legal ins and outs and that, potentially we can get a legal opinion, indeed, in relation to those powers, etc. But I'm not recommending that is a prudent use of your time and money at this point in time.
Thank you, James. Debbie, waiting patiently.
I'm interested in recommendation 2 and particularly the last line, we request an urgent presentation of long-term solutions to meet water demands. And I'm picking up on Councillor Curtin's comment, which I agree with. We would do well to listen to the tank stakeholders. So is that recommendation not going against the ideals of the tank process?
Look, the way that staff have read it, Councillor, is that councillors collectively would like to be better sighted on what is coming through the tank process, which does include the long-term solutions. So what we were proposing to do is to bring more of that information to this table. We had hoped to deal with that by way of an open invitation to councillors to attend tank group meetings, but we appreciate that is a significant time commitment and that it might be more efficient from your point of view if we bring some of those presentations. So we obviously did recently in relation to Dr Smith's science report, but now in relation to the long-term solutions, we will bring those presentations to the Environment and Services Committee for all councillors to be better sighted on that over the coming months.
After it's been through tank, though?
Well, look, tank is presently looking at a bunch of those things. So ultimately you'll get final advice from the tank group, but my view is that we need to serve you better by providing you with more insights into that as we go along. So you can expect at the next Environment and Services Committee meeting a presentation on some of these issues, and undoubtedly at the Environment and Services Committee meeting after that. So there'll be a rolling schedule, if you like, of presentations out of tank to councillors.
It's coming out of tank. I'm concerned, how is that word urgent impacting on other core needs across the region that are also equally urgent? For instance,
just about everything we're working on at the moment seems to have urgent associated with it. So, look, we're doing our best just to, we've recognised that this is something that councillors are concerned about and you want advice on. So, as I say, the next Environment Services Committee meeting, we will bring further advice from the tank process to the table.
Thank you. It's more of a comment than a question, but I just think the idea of bringing this information to the council is a really good idea, and I would just, in terms of the comment that Debbie's made about, well, are we doing something to subvert tank? I don't see that. The information, the science we've commissioned it belongs to the council, so I don't see any problem with it coming before the Environmental Committee as well as tank. It's not, sorry? It's not a proprietary right the tank has. In actual fact, I think it's an excellent idea. So I really support it. And as for the thing here, I think in terms of Neil's point, he says, basically I understand Neil's message be, well, a problem's been put in front of us, we're required to act. Unless if we don't do something, then we're seen as being dereliction of our duty. But I would say that one of the things we have to act, but is act in a timely and a reasonable manner. Doesn't mean we act instantly, as long as we act in a timely and reasonable manner. So I think the processes you put in place are going to address that we're going to act in a balanced, considered and timely manner and not delay.
I just, before and Neil wants to come back, but
I just want to move 2.2 to 2.5, Mr. Chair.
the whole lot.
Splitting 2.2 and 2.1. 2.6.
Someone else might want to be voted on.
I thought you don't want to move all of them.
Well, I'm happy to move all, Mr. Chair, if you like.
Are you?
Yeah.
We have a mover, we have a seconder, just to speak.
Well,
That's including Councillor Bevan's slight tweak to 2.4.
Oh, I think, didn't we agree that May, that it wasn't a big issue for you? I may have a cup of tea even.
No, I was satisfied with what Liz said, which is that if there is a renewal, the council will reserve the right to review any renewed consent once we have the tank findings in front of us, and that's fine as long as
Doesn't
that's...
that say
that's
that?
fine.
Then?
Okay.
Look, that has been the practice in recent
So we
years.
have a mover and
new
a seconder.
consents have all been subject to
You're the
tank.
mover, Neil, so you're right to speak first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And in moving this, I want to reiterate the comments I've made already, that the recommendations across the board are a significant response when they include the new consenting arrangements. I totally accept that, but my concern rests around the existing consent and the lack of information we've got available in front of us to make a call on how we manage existing consents between now and the inevitable climate calamity we'll have with a dry spell, possibly not next year, but so we're working on that to make sure we get plenty of rainfall next year. But if it's not next year, it'll be the year after. So what I'm saying to you is, we've got the new science that confronting us now around minimum flows. That has come from the tank, appropriately come from the tank group, so they've done their job. Our job is to assimilate that evidence and that new science into what we do around the resource and managing the resource. My entire thesis here was not to frustrate tank, not to supersede tank, but simply to respond to the evidence they produced, and in so doing address how we approach our existing resource consent holders, have that conversation with them. To me, existing that 2.2 to 2.5 is a recipe to do nothing in that space, when in fact we should be having a substantial engagement with them. So that's really my point. For the want of 1 month's work, pulling together the evidence around our consenting arrangements is all that I was seeking, so that we as a council are perceived and seen to be active in managing a different situation. And when you go back to that report, it's clear that our resource consents across the board are stream depleting no matter where they are. That's the evidence we've got, whether we like it or not. And I'm saying to you that we ought to have reflected that in the steps we've got with our existing consent holders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, yeah, thank you, Chair. Find it remarkable that we've got all these things on our plate that are urgent. Everyone's as urgent as the other and just as important as everything else. When I look back and think about how the whole tank process was delayed, and how the Mohaka catchment plan changes was being delayed, or it's the point that it's up to now, because of all the work that had to be done on the Ruatana water storage scheme. It's really unfortunate that councillors around the table don't quite grasp that fact. I mean, I think that getting on to Plan Change 6 is important for Central Hawke's Bay, but there are just priorities coming at us all over the place, so we just got to take them as they come.
wish to speak. I don't mean to be cynical or jab at anyone here, but I remember when I first joined the council, Fenton asked me to go on tank. I didn't know what tank was, but I just thought, sounds like one hell of a job, and do you mind if I don't? But subsequently, I have gone along to a lot of those tank meetings, and I have seen the incredible amount of work that's gone in. I have seen the competence of the people that are sitting around that room, and I would challenge you to go and look. If you haven't been to a tank meeting, go to a tank meeting, because it's certainly my personal kaupapa that we are going to have to delegate to our communities. And this is probably the best example of a delegation to our community that we've got, and a model not just for Hawke's Bay but for the whole country, where we have embraced the right and left of these arguments. And Tom's pointed out, everybody's there who we needed to have there. And part of the problem has been getting them to get to know each other and understand each other's point of view. And that's taken years, and of course that's what some of these other protagonists who have gone for the Water Conservation Order are moaning about. It's taken too long. They've gone to a much more combative process, and they've got to fight, and we'll give them a fight. But you don't delegate to really good people like this in your community and then say, oh, we also want to do all the things as well. I mean, sure, the information's there, you can go along any time, but I'll tell you what, it's not going to be a half-day session if you want to get your head around all of the complexities of the things that they've done, because sit there for a while and just watch it. It is really complex. So, I think we should respect the work that's happened there. We do not have the time to do everything. I mean, we're going to have a similar thing come out of Wairoa. We've got Mana Aharuri, who've got a statutory board. Well, when those people, we hopefully going to have, and we do have a very startling group of people that are on that board. We're not going to debate every little thing when they come back to us. So I just think we just need to pause a little bit here about our delegated committees. And I wasn't going to say this, but my dear friend Peter Roebuck once said to me, you don't have a dog, embark, and because you don't have time. And Fenton might understand that, but but if you want to know about tank, go and have a look at it. So that's just my comment.
Mr. Chairman, as chairman of the committee, and just to, because you made the point that I was going to make, I just put one last edge to it. We, as a council, did, my dear friend and colleague, a departed councillor now, made sure that we wrote terms of reference for the tank group that indicated that we were giving them this charge, we were giving them this mission, and that it was our intent as a council to basically respect the recommendations that came from tank at the end of the day. And now, so we can get into a quibble here about how much do we delegate, how much we don't delegate. We've done exactly the same thing with Peter's group on coastal hazards. Enormous amount of work has been presented to dozens and dozens of people over dozens and dozens of meetings. And if we think, oh, well, let's bring it all back now to the Environment Committee and have another go at it, why the hell did we do that in the first place? Why do we set it up? Why do we set up tank? Why do we set up a coastal hazards committee? Why do we do all this stuff? If we feel like, oh, Jesus, we all have to get on top of this now and review all the bidding. So where do we draw the line? It becomes a question on each of these, obviously. But so in this case, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. Hopefully, it's not so far away that it compromises our ability to act intelligently at the moment, which is what we're doing in these recommendations.
Look, just briefly, I just want to pick up on the theme that Tom has had and try and blend out with where Neil is at. We currently have a blue going on about the WCO, and our argument is we don't want people remotely making decisions on things which affect us. And what Tom and Rex are saying is that the tank process is about the people being engaged in making the decisions on the ground as collectively, rather than having it imposed from them on top. So I agree with that, and I think that we need to be very careful about this, and I respect Tom's position, is we need to make sure that we're not making decisions which preempt tank or undermine tank. But on the other side, there are some very challenging issues here, and I think it behoves us all to be as well informed as we can, so when the decisions come, we aren't caught flat-footed. And so that's why I support the information coming to the committee, so we can be informed, but the decision-making and the pace of that is driven by tank. So when tank come to report to us, we know almost as much as what they do, and we are therefore informed about it and with their recommendations. So I've got no intention of letting this subvert tank or cut it off at its pass. I think it's a great process, and I want it to continue.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will sum up and let me reiterate once more that my suggestions in regard to existing consent arrangements and the content of the part of this, the recommendation, do not subvert the tank process. They simply say we have received from tank a certain piece of information which behoves us to take some action and consider it in the context of our current consenting regime. It doesn't override tank, it simply says, what have we got in front of us now to respond to the evidence that tank has produced? It provides an opportunity to be proactive, in fact, in using that information and going and using it in a way that can get us and overcome what I say is a looming crisis should the weather gods not behave as we want them to. So it's by way of preparation for that. It's a good opportunity, in fact, to have that conversation with existing consent holders in the event that such a calamity may occur. So my view, finally, Mr. Chair, is yes, we do. Whether you like it or not, we have a crisis in waiting in regard to the weather and the allocation we've got, the over-allocation we've got in our water system. I'm not for a moment suggesting that we ignore, override the tank process. I'm saying use the information we've got for good management, and that always remains the responsibility of council, not delegated down to tank to make that decision. It's our decision.
For all the recommendations, all those in favour? Aye. Against? You moved it, didn't you? Yeah. Oh, okay.
That's not true. Sorry, it's not true.
It's not true?
It's not true. Oh, it's probably not the standing rules, but in other places, in other conventions, if you move and you second it,
I wouldn't. Yeah.
You're bound to vote for it.
Never mind, the job's done. We spent no time.
Yeah. Tick for Alan.
Does he want to stop against?
No, we're not going to ask him. I'm not going to ask
Our most important issues are here.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. I want to move to item 11. Alan's pushing us along, and rightly so. 10, sorry. Oh, 10. Oh, you're going to let Tom move your...
Not sure yet.
Neil, will you like to move your recommendations?
Well,
talk to them.
Happy to move the recommendations, Mr. Chair. We'll speak to them in advance of that. I think the only...
No, I seconded Tom's resolution.
Oh, well, let's take that.
Yeah. No, he needs to present it, what he wants to say to it, and then we'll have questions.
Consider it presented.
Okay, right, Debbie, questions.
Thank you. Just on the HR report, and one thing I'm sorry I didn't raise on the day, James, but I noted there are quite a few accidents in the works group. What are we doing to be getting a bit more of a handle on that in that HR reporting that I'm referring to?
Look, as I understand it, the level of accidents, the works group are considered to be actually relatively low relative to the inherent nature of the activities. None of them have been particularly severe, but naturally when people are using shovels and spades and diggers and those sort of things, that there are issues that arise.
Spearhead the question, are you comfortable you've got a handle on the responsibilities there?
It is a conversation that the executives had very recently, and our view is that it is it's adequate, but I'm more than happy to have another look at that and come back to you directly on it.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I did go and see Mr. Moore after that, and the main issue with the off-time work was someone with a new hip dislocated it and had to take some time off, so that was the main issue. However, happened at work. I had a question, 7.2, presentation of the Napier City Council Aquarium Expansion business case, which was a great fanfare of opportunity. Where to next on that? Probably through you to the CE chair. What are the expectations there? Have we seen enough now? We just have to write a cheque. Is that what I'm hearing, or what happens? What happens next? What's the process? Is all I'm interested in.
So Napier City has a group overseeing the continued advancement of their business case. We sit on that group. So at staff level, we continue to be engaged, and the intention as we come down the home straight on advice in the LTP is that you'll get a more concrete proposal. I can't tell you now whether it'll be the November workshop or the December workshop, but it'll be one of those two workshops in the LTP, and you'll have a sum, if you like, presented to you for your consideration as to whether to include in the consultation document on the LTP or not.
We'll leave it at that because we don't want to go into debate on. Right? Yeah, certainly then.
My question is, what is the justification for this council having staff on a work group on a Napier City Council-led program?
Look, they invited us to be involved on the basis of several things. One is that we're a partner in the Matariki Regional Economic Development Strategy, and this is an action under that. But more substantially, they asked us to be involved because of our responsibilities in marine management and marine science in the region, and they felt that there were strong synergies between the project. We felt that there was potentially some synergies for us there, including environmental education, but we've been very, very clear with Napier City all the way through that there is no financial commitment to this from the council, and we have repeatedly expressed concerns and reservations about the nature of our interest relative to what's proposed. So there's no commitment on that, but it is a significant regional project that may have some relevance to us, so we have been devoting a very modest amount of time to attending meetings about every 2 months as the project has come together.
Any more questions on the paper? Neil, do you wish to move your recommendation to a seconder? Tom, would you give him the... No, Fen had his hand up. Fen sings it.
Well, I won't sing it.
Neil, do you wish to speak anymore?
Well, other than just say that it's very... not as exciting as an environmental.
I thought it was pretty exciting, actually. It could have got really exciting on the 7.2.
Yes, indeed.
Fenton.
Just on the aquarium thing, it's interesting they're comparing it to Hobbiton. I mean, Hobbiton turns over $50 million per annum. If it's anything close to that, I think if we are investing with them, we need a coupon of 6%, and I'll sign up.
Any other speakers?
Just on the Hobbiton thing, I heard that. I was tempted to ask a question about how you compare the aquarium at Napier with Hobbiton, which has had 3 smash films, global films go, and the publicity with that. How do they compare? I couldn't see it at all myself.
Any other speakers? Neil, I think you've had your say. All those in favour of receiving all the recommendations from the court? Aye. Against? They are received. Thank you very much. Item 11, fixing the common seal. You certainly can. No discussion on it. Commons. All those in favour? Against? We need to get them back. Transport Committee. Report from the... Why don't we have a... we're just receiving that.
Mr Chairman, there are no recommendations from there?
No,
so,
no.
Yeah.
Okay. Moved by Alan. Second. All those...
I just note that there should be an opportunity for council to have an input on... Alan, there should be an opportunity for the council, together with the Transport Committee, to have an input on the 13 options for Manawatu Gorge. I've had that commitment from NZTA.
Question, would we be able to have that presentation, would it be able to come to one of our council committees?
Big pardon?
Would it be able to come to one of our council committees when we're all present?
I thought that we'd probably be doing a special with everyone invited.
Any other questions? You've had your say, second the movement. So all those in favour of accepting the recommendation? Aye. Against? It's carried. Item 13. Debbie's right. We've got some guests coming in at 3 o'clock.
Look, the reason for 3 o'clock is that they are meeting with Napier City Council at 1 o'clock, so...
Can't be changed.
We're just in the queue. They had alternatively been scheduled for tomorrow and a special meeting of council with them tomorrow, so we thought piggybacking on today's council meeting was better than getting you back tomorrow, but 3 o'clock was the earliest they could do.
That would be an interesting solution.
We could make inquiries.
Could we make 1 o'clock?
Yes.
I think Leon's already on.
I'll email, yeah.
Gee, we'll have to speed through the rest if you want to have a sausage roll for lunch.
You've got time for sausage rolls too.
Okay, collection of rates, 13.
Yep, I'll introduce the paper for you, Mr Chair. It's just an information paper to take you through the results of the collection of rates from the 2016-17 year. Trudy's here to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Ben.
So, and I've asked this person to write to the chairman or chief executive. A Whitehall constituent has a couple of rental homes up there and a couple in Hastings, and he has not got one rate increase that's under 17%. 17 to 20, I think, is in the bracket. I have asked him to write and preferably include any QV change or any value change. Would that make the difference? That's my question. Is that the anomaly here?
It could be, or there's different schemes, like Wairau schemes don't have as many as Hastings, and Hastings had a QV review last year, so that would impact on it. But are you talking about this year's rates, or?
What's the 10% increase?
The 10%, he's 17 to 20.
Next year's rates.
The other thing that's happened obviously is the economic development rate's gone up as well, which is partly the funding through to Hawke's Bay Tourism. So that's on top of the 10% related to the general rate. So there are some other components within the rating bill that have gone up, and that's
I have asked him to send us his detail. I'm just making the point.
Yep.
I think best to send it to the local guest otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, he's worked it out. I spoke to him as well.
He's asking what the basis of it, just send the rate book. Tell us what the reason is.
Peter.
So just looking at the rate arrears and our ability to collect the money, I was a bit surprised at how big the numbers are. And also I didn't realise that we lost our opportunity after 6 years. What happens when a property is sold? Is it a requirement then that the rate arrears be paid or not?
Yes, it is, yeah. We deal with the lawyers direct and we clean up the rates bill on every sale.
Okay, so there's no particular benefit for
Are
us.
you talking about the leasehold lands or all properties?
All properties,
All
all property
properties.
sales.
Yeah, so, because I'm thinking maybe we could put a caveat on the titles, but if they get sorted anyway.
Yes, they do get sorted, yep. And clean heat loans, if there's a loan on the property, the majority get cleaned up at that time. Occasionally, the new owner will opt to carry on the loan, but the majority, like 98%, is cleaned up when there's a sale, yep.
Any other question? Oh, no, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I note in paragraph 12, you had 200 accounts which are sent across to debt collection agencies with values of over $690. Was that basically all of them, or was that, what sort of percentage of that was of the ones over $690 that was sent across to the outside agency?
Well, that was the top 200 accounts up to the dollar value of 690. So the total outstanding was 5,921, which is table 4, is the total number of ratepayers outstanding. And we just sent off the first 200, the higher amount, to see if we could get a better collection from using an external person after we've tried it internally.
So, so because that 5,921 includes ones that are at some point up to 5 years old, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So, what's your analysis shown you so far about that? What's the your feeling after sending those 200 accounts away?
Well, we collected in 39,000, or nearly 40,000 more that we haven't been able to, but we've got to the stage where we have to make some serious considerations of whether we do a legal option or go down putting it on their mortgage, identify if they've got mortgages and doing that type of thing. So basically that's the next step. So we're in discussions with the debt collection agencies now in relation to doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Trudy, I just wonder if you could help me understand the table 1 of your paper. I'm just looking at a uniform annual charge for economic development, 1.611 mil, and then further down, so it's a uniform annual charge there, and then further down is an economic development entry, 702,000. Do you see those two?
Yes, yes.
I thought the economic development revenue stream was all uniform annual charge. Can you?
No, it's 70% is the uniform annual charge, which is on households. The 30%, which is on capital value, is on business.
Ah, okay, so that's the split between those two.
70-30 with a limit for Wairoa.
And your emergency management annual charge, 70%, is that 70% of the total spend with the others raised from the other councils? Is that
Yes.
how I read that?
No, that's, again, I'm not sure. I have to come back to you on that one, because I don't think we do a split emergency management. That's a uniform annual charge.
But was there a reason for having 70% there?
Yeah, I think it's the 70% belongs on the line above.
I
think
see.
It's
Okay.
a typo error.
Sure, okay. No,
So
that's
it's 70
fine.
and 30 down below.
Okay, and...
Sorry about that.
So the other issue is the clean heat subsidy. Again, we've got a fixed amount,
Yes.
and then in land value we're rating we're using land value as the base. What's
That's
the
right.
difference between those two methods of charging?
The fixed amount is the loan, and that is basically if the homeowner takes out a loan, they pay 1/10.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yep.
Whereas the lower one is everybody pays a proportion because we're cleaning up the air. So all ratepayers within the zones, Zone 1 and Zone 2, get a rate for cleaner air,
Sure, no, that makes sense, yes. And finally, the Upper Tukituki, is that not a scheme?
Yes, it's a flood control scheme.
And it's based on land value,
Yes.
not an area value.
No, it's a land value scheme.
Is that anomalous with those schemes at the bottom of the page, drain schemes? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Again, I have to get back to you. Upper Tukituk's been that way forever, and
Sure.
I'm not sure the logic behind why it was done that way particularly. But yeah, quite happy to come back and
Sure,
let
thank
you know.
Yes.
Morning.
Yeah, so just in terms of number 9 and 10, the you've got 114 remissions. How long do those remissions, just a series of questions for me, how long does the remissions last? More than 2 years?
Oh, absolutely. It lasts forever unless the land is being used, the purpose of the land changes.
Yeah,
Like
that on some councils I deal with, it's a short term.
Oh, no.
So the other question is, how many arrears are there after the remissions?
Okay, so the ones that apply for their remissions, their rates are totally...
Yeah, I've got that.
So on table 3, we have a column called multiple marry land. And now the outstanding amounts in this column are what we've identified as marry land, which is outstanding, because when we send the invoice out, who owns a marry land? It's really difficult to actually nail who's going to pay the rates. And unless they come in full in the remission form, we have to continue to invoice them.
In the envelope too?
It might be to the owners of this, block,
So they're just usually returned?
just usually returned.
Yeah. So how many of those are under $10?
Oh. That's a...
Yeah, there's a form here of a total outstanding under $10 is over 1,070.
Oh, the under $10 is basically the penalty that's gone on, that people have sneaked in and thought if they just pay their rates, the penalty, the $10 will just sit there. But the multiple marry ownership, there's 443, and they owe us 215,000. I don't know how many of that is made up with $10. How many marry ones are $10? I don't know.
Question. The $10 you refer to in here is the $10 penalty, not the $10 for the actual rate.
No, $10 for the penalty.
Yes, the
Oh, yeah, so it's actually, in actual fact, it's
fine.
It's nothing.
It's nothing. And this year's invoices that have just gone out will have the outstanding $10 on there, and we'll collect it this year.
So just by, I've been involved in this a lot. What happens with Māori land that has no services, i.e. bushland, etc., there may be thousands of owners. So in actual fact, we should be paying them something because they're leaving the bush in a natural state. And there is funds set up to do that. But, we'll let the council off in this particular case. But it looks bad, but it's nowhere near as bad as it looks.
No, it's not as bad as it looks.
And so I won't be embarrassed eating the lunch today.
I might be given my Hastings. Thank you. For the recommendation. Seconded by Rick. All those in favour? Against? It's moved. I just want to pause for a second here because are we going to be able to make 1 o'clock at Napier even if they want us? Okay, no lunch.
Take it with you.
You'll be having that. Okay, projects.
Chair, as per usual, we'll just take this as read and happy to answer any questions that councillors have.
That's a first. Do we have a seconder?
No.
You want to speak to one of the items? So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Chairman's report, you've just got it in front of you. Sorry about that, but I only completed it yesterday. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I just made some comments on a couple of things. The water conservation order, you can read that for yourself, but I guess it's fair to say my position hasn't changed on that.
Can I just say on that clearly Bryce Johnson has got quite rattled over the opposition that he's received. If one interprets the opinion piece that he wrote a day or two.
And the article today where he said, now everyone can calm down. Well, we're not going to calm down.
No, nor should they.
So everyone can calm. I loved that. I immediately sent a text out to a few associates and said, you know, he definitely doesn't like it, doesn't like the fight. Okay, that's my view of him too. I was pretty angry when I read his thing this morning. Plan Change 6, there's of course been a huge amount of discussion coming out of Central and out of the Council that, you know, most people thought these two things, that Ruataniwha and Plan Change 6 were running in parallel. And given that one has fallen over, it just means that we definitely have a lot of people worried about that, and we do need to have some discussion on what we do about that without causing particularly draconian effects. So I think we need to workshop that subject. That's what I'm saying. Fenton, do you want to stop? You're commenting on my report, Fenton?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a question. When was the discrete resolution not to advance the 60 million? When was the council resolution for that?
It was, I checked, and it was last meeting.
A council resolution?
It's in the minutes.
Okay.
It's in the minutes.
Well, my obvious question with that is how does that affect the consultation we had?
Well, it was subject to consultation.
What's your question?
No, he said, when did it happen? If you read the minute.
Yeah, it didn't, but I don't know. Then went on. But Fenton then went on to say, what about the consultation? What do you mean by that?
There was consultation to take the money into that process. When's the consultation to take it out?
No, the consultation was on if the conditions precedent were met, would we invest? And what we've said now is the conditions precedent haven't been met.
Yeah, that is quite. Actually, so yeah, that is right. But you want to talk about one or two?
I want to move your report.
No, not ready. I want to go through it. The regional mayors. Sorry, Alan. What?
Just this nomination of Mr. Taumaina. Was that your nomination, or was that a joint nomination by the mayors and so on?
I'll get to that in a second,
okay.
Alan. So the regional mayors, we do need to do that. And 11th of October has been set for that date, so trying to make sure that all the mayors turn up. Matariki Reds, as you know, there's been a lot of concern, especially from me representing my own view and representing a lot of the people's view around this table, of other councillors, that this was very badly structured. So I've had some vigorous discussions with the other mayors on this, and as a result of talking to some other people, we put to the existing governance structure this structure. Napier City said Napier Mayor was enthusiastic and wants to nominate Nahiwi as the chair, so it didn't come from me, it came from him, although I supported it, just to get us rolling on this situation. We've also made a recommendation of a list of 5 or 6 people who we regard as business leaders, and they are considering that at the moment. At one point, Tāngata Whenua, or a section of Tāngata Whenua, said they wanted equal numbers, equal other people equal them. That wasn't acceptable, but what was acceptable was equal tangata whenua to equal regional leaders and the business people nominated on their performance. We felt that we wanted the chair of the DHB and the chair of Nikki. So this is the whole principle of this is that it was premised on that governance rules Hawke's Bay, not chief executives. Not that we don't have the finest chief executives in the country, but they are the chief executives and the governors are the governors. There's been a bit of discussion on that.
You spelled tangata wrong too.
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's my editor. I'll talk to my editor. Whakakī, I just wanted, that got very tense, the Whakakī situation. We had the environmental people giving us in excess of $1 million from our hotspot program, and we had on the Friday and on the Wednesday there were quite a few people, as they do in Wairoa, about to shoot each other. So we went up there and talked to the farmers involved and talked to the committee, and we found that everybody, Fenton joined us, and we found that everybody was very amenable. Probably they'd had a bit of a bash up before we got there, and they all recognised that they needed to work with each other. As long as we paid, they would work with each other. And so it was been very successful. We had to go 3 times in a week, but that was fine. But basically, Whakakī is, and the first meeting we had was with the committee, and a point that I make there, it's a historical problem of removing wetlands 100 years ago. So comes from that all sorts of issues. You can't raise the lake because it goes on to pastures now. So, but we find ourselves in that situation, and as I say, everyone was keen to work together. The rest I won't go through. It is just the various meetings that I've had with people through the month. Been quite a busy month for James and I. One thing I would like to comment on, Fenton was going to comment on this also, but we met the Tau Wairoa group, and they are the group that are dealing with the treaty, the Wairoa Treaty Settlement. They are an incredibly good group of people, and they have taken at great pains to represent their entire community. Every marae is represented. They've got 14 people on their governance group, which is quite a lot, but given the quality of the people that are on that group, I think they're going to do particularly well. So it was really gratifying to see that they were thinking about it, and I think they're going to be a great group that we're going to be able to work with in the future. And Fenton's going to talk a bit about that as well, I think. Okay, any questions?
So how much does the council put into the Whakakī?
No, I think a little bit more. 1.4. Yeah.
1.4.
I need James to actually, do you know that? 1.4.
2.4 project.
No, it's a 2.8. The whole project is 2. No, I think it's 2.8 up to. But
Do I hear 5?
Well, Chief Executive just left the room, but of course Mr. Mohi he whakapapas back to Whakakī like everyone else in Heratonga, so he's very, very concerned, interested. Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Second, Councillor Bevan.
Mr. Chair, you asked for questions.
Oh, questions. Oh, another question. Well, can you hold while we...
Well, Mr. Chair, just in terms of this number 3, the Regional Mayors Workshop, is that for just regional mayors or is it all of us?
Oh, no, it's for... it's the regional mayors to talk to council. So we have a workshop where all the council's there and all the regional mayors, and everyone puts on the table this proposition. Their thinking.
So are we going to discuss this whole notion of us collecting rates?
Absolutely.
I mean, are we going in with a position or out with a position?
No, we are going in with no position. We're going in to hear their... We don't have a position on it. You might, and I might individually, but council doesn't. Thank you. And we have a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. Minor items. Oh, Tutera?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick update on what's happening at Tutera. There was a bubbler installed at Wakapiro, which was the little lake to the north of Tutera, on Friday, which was in there, sitting there operating now. Big thank you to Unison for installing the power into there as quickly as they did, and for apparently volunteering to meet that bill themselves. So that was really good. And if anyone wants to know any more about the bubbler and how it's going to operate, and Dr. Andy Hicks has done a really good video on which is on our Facebook page.
Thank you. Next one. Thank you, Neil. I saw the bubbler going in when we were driving past, James, and I saw the bubbler going in. It looked pretty impressive. And fantastic work being done around Tutera since you've been in charge, Mr. Bailey. Fenton.
No, it's me.
Oh, Peter.
So since the press release and the agreement to put on hold any further consents for water take applications for the Hiratonga Plains, those of you who monitor the weekly consent application spreadsheet will see that the applications have continued to roll in. I'm interested to know, James, how many, for how much water we now have put on hold, and whether they are renewals or new fresh consents or whatever. Just a little bit of information about what that backlog is currently looking like.
Can I suggest that James will come back to that? Thank you very much.
Yep.
Fenton?
No, I had another one.
Oh, you had two?
I had two. Coastal
easy
hazards. So, thank you to those councillors who attended the joint workshop of councillors that was held earlier this week to discuss the coastal hazards strategy and where we're at. Just to update those of you who did not attend that meeting, there was I think probably a consensus from all of the councillors there that a joint committee or a governance group, if you like, in one form of another needs to continue beyond the work that's been tasked by the current committee. There was discussion around the creation of a contributory fund, which would have, and the purpose of the contributory fund was to enable intergenerational investment in some of the solutions or pathways that the panels are likely to come up with. And I think there was probably conditional agreement that such a contributory fund would need to be created, but there will need to be some careful thinking about the rules and the governance of such a fund, and that's all under in space at present, but it will need to be thought through. The third item that was discussed at that meeting was the whole business of funding the pathways once they're established. And what's happened currently is that the pathways have been scored, but no money's been put on the table. And what might happen at the next meetings of the panels is that their preferences might change depending on what the cost of the various pathways might be. But to cost those pathways, we have to have a public-private split of those costs, and the public-private split is going to vary depending on the type of solution, whether it's renourishment, whether it's groins, whether it's seawalls, etc. And with the only way that we can get some numbers in front of the panels is by the councils discussing and agreeing in principle on what that public-private split might look like for each of the pathways. Now, I've actually calculated that there are something like 28 pathways that need to be considered by Hastings District, and 22 pathways need to be considered by Napier. So it's a bit of work that TAG has to do to come up with proposals, which will then have to go back to those two councils to discuss and agree, or agree in principle, and that work has to be done before the panels can meet and have a look at the costings and determine whether they wish to support the current preferred pathways or whether those pathways will change because the funding options make a more sensible choice, the one that they'd prefer to recommend back to the council. So that's where we're currently at with the project.
Really good meeting. Now, Fenton and Napier want us. No, someone else? Napier, 1 o'clock.
Staff.
1 o'clock, we're at Napier, everyone. So,
My question staff upstairs have asked me to take it offline. So.
thank you. Now, Fenton, God, I've been trying to get to you all day.
Nothing to report, Chair. Two parts of the visit that we haven't touched on. One was a meeting with the council laws and the Māori committee members in the morning, and finally I think we've got a bit of go forward on a few issues up there. My previous experience with those sort of meetings is it's regional council's done nothing, regional council hasn't done this, regional council hasn't done that, but we actually got to start talking about what the regional council has done and does do. And I think finally we may have a bit of cut through with the conversation. The big part of the day though was of that trip was we were invited to look at their wastewater system with a new engineer they've got who I thought was quite a switched on guy, and is basically opening up all the issues that they've got, and they have some major issues, including if you like, a system where when it's under pressure it does void straight into the river, like a lot of these systems do around the country, and they are opening all the books up to look at all those particular issues as part of the consent process going forward. And I felt it was a very open and easy conversation at this early stage. I thought they were very forthcoming with all their issues. There was nothing hidden. There was drains that go into the rivers shown to us. There was just nothing was held back. So I thought if that's the standard that that they're going to conduct their consent process under, I have high hopes that at least everyone will be informed going forward. Whether they get the solution that we and the community desire will be the second conversation, but I thought that was quite a good day. In fact, I even go as far as say some of the improvements that guy's put in since he's been there, for monitoring, for remote monitoring, for a range of challenges that system faces, I thought was pretty stunning. So I just want to make that point. And always good to see the chairman up in Waddle. One old boy come wandering out of I thought that was really classic, and got straight stuck into him. I thought, that's my boy. Get into him, Tim Grant, you lovely old fella.
He did.
It was good. But anyway, it was very helpful the last couple of weeks having the...
He didn't want any wetlands, no trees planted, he wanted nothing. He just wanted...
But he was clear in his view, Chair.
Yeah.
But the last point to make is it's been very helpful having the Chair and the CE on a couple of these bigger issues in the last couple of weeks, and we have had some cut through and go forward, so it's good.
Thank you. No other issue? No other? We'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. And as I said, Napier's expecting us at 1. So over in the
main committee room.
Geez, that'll be close.